Hi, I'm Ian Trump, and I'm the Global Cybersecurity Strategist for SolarWinds MSP, and I'm delighted to present the 7 pitfalls of cybersecurity based on our 2017 Cybersecurity Survey. A little bit about my background. As you know, for the last 2.5 years, I've been working as the Global Cybersecurity Strategist, and both behind the scenes in trying to make the products more secure, and in front of the scenes of advocating for the MSP and IT provider community to improve security for their customers and for their own businesses. So our security survey is going to take a broad look at where small, medium businesses are and enterprises are in terms of cybersecurity. We have identified 7, I'm going to say, problematic issues as a result of sort of the design of this survey. And we're going to put it into some context around cybercrime as a service, sort of the new evolution of where we are today in terms of cybercrime. And finally, we'll conclude with some security tips for MSPs. There are some great takeaways from this survey, and hopefully over the next 40 minutes or so, you'll get some of that insight and can start thinking about how you might be able to address some of the problems we're going to discuss. So to give you some context, a survey is really a snapshot in time of where businesses are at. And as you know, with the various reports coming out and the media's near obsession with cybercrime, we have really great insight into what the bad guys are doing. And the bad guys are innovative, they are practicing agile development, and they are continuing an assault on business. And what we've seen is, although some cyber criminal groups are of limited capability, it would seem now that because of the cybercrime as a service industry, just about anyone can gain access to significantly advanced malware. And in fact, we've seen in Alaska recently with the WikiLeaks disclosure of CIA hacking tools, a hacking tool known as Double Pulsar was freely available for download, and that was quickly used by cyber criminals to exploit unpatched systems. So we are certainly seeing an advancement in cyber criminal capability, taking on characteristics of advanced persistent threat actors, which typically used to be as part of nation states' cyber espionage capabilities. We found that a lot of synergies are occurring between both the APT groups and cyber criminals. One of the more concerning issues is the availability of cybercrime tools and services that are posted on the darknet. And this ranges from, forced service, distributed denial service attacks. There recently was a takedown by the U.S. government of individuals working in Israel that were for hire distributed denial service attacks. And certainly that's gotten on the radar in the last little while because of the giant botnets like Myra that are out there that are available for hire. Certainly the big takeaway, though, and no surprise to my audience, would be that ransomware and banking Trojans do remain the top malware threats. And we'll talk a little bit about the context of those particular types of attacks and sort of even the emergence now of the business email compromise attack, or basically a fake email that asks for money to be transferred on the behalf of a senior executive. All certainly trends to keep in mind as we start going through the survey results. Another really important aspect to look at is growth factors, and what we're seeing is a phenomenal growth in the cybersecurity industry, contrasted with a phenomenal growth in a cybercrime take, if you will. So what we're seeing at the end of this is a small industry valued at $170 billion in 2020 will take on a $2 trillion economic loss from cyber criminal activity. This seems quite a bit out of balance, and that $2 trillion will come out of many small, medium, and businesses in the G20 nations, which are generally the victims of the cyber criminal activity, as well as the perpetrators. For the first time in a very long time since we've been measuring, the Europe actually eclipsed Russia, China, and the United States in terms of where cybercrime is emanating from. But again, it's a little bit difficult to do attribution because you can rent servers anywhere in the world and perpetrate cybercrime from them. And just because you're in that country doesn't necessarily mean the bad guys are truly of that particular nationality or region. I think one of the more compelling statistics to look at, just sort of very broadly, is about the growth of the internet value chain over the next years. We are seeing projections saying that about $5.8 trillion will be what the internet is worth by 2020. When you think about the losses of cybercrime, and if we call that like $6 trillion by 2020, that's about a 33% tax perpetrated by cybercrime on every dollar made online. So certainly that is something to keep in mind when you're talking with your customers, that globally it would appear that cybercrime is poised to make trillions of dollars off of poorly secured and poorly protected networks. One of the more interesting challenges I think that there are in the MSP space is that MSPs are having difficulty selling their customers basic or even foundational security. There seems to be a lot of apathy in terms of customers. I think that's changing. Certainly customers are aware of the security threat, but motivating them to take that next step is the hard part. And hopefully the security survey results that we're going to talk about may help you in steering the conversations with your customers in those directions. So we see objections along three lines: that we're too small to be appealing, we don't have anything worth stealing, and we have nothing to lose. So these are complete falsehoods, because to a cyber criminal actor, an IP address is an IP address. And until they've managed to exploit it, they really don't know what's on the other side. And one of the more interesting statistics that came out recently was that 40% of businesses are actually paying the ransom for ransomware. So what's interesting is small, medium, or large business, it really doesn't matter. Everything is a target. The actual infrastructure that business runs is monetizable. And once the bad guys get in there, they may actually conduct a bit of a reconnaissance to see if there's anything of value, as opposed to just dropping ransomware. So there are certainly a number of different areas where that small business can be turned into quite a profitable venture for cyber criminals. The other objection is we don't have anything worth stealing. I find this hilarious, because at some point everything is worth something. And as I mentioned, the infrastructure itself, but every business has customers, every business has something that they sell for profit, and they have banking, they have employee information. All of that is certainly worth something. So even the actual function of that business that is making revenue can be impacted by an attack like ransomware. So the time actually that a business spends doing business is worth stealing. So that's another thing that you can talk about with your customers. And of course, we have nothing to lose. Well, reputation certainly, but we, through this survey, have some data that may shock and alarm folks that have been putting forward that idea about nothing to lose. So no EU-UK presentation would be complete without talking a little bit about GDPR and the global opportunity in that space. As you know, it comes into force about a year from now. At that particular point in time, user privacy will drive many of the security improvements, including a requirement to report on a data breach within 72 hours, severe fines for GDPR non-compliance, the ability of supervisory authorities to go in and do privacy audits. et cetera, et cetera. I strongly suggest that if you're in the UK and EU, you get onto LinkedIn or onto some of the forums and you start studying up on GDPR, because there is, as they say, gold in them there hills. Um, the projections are showing us that there will be an investment in security as a result of this, in secure storage, but also in the security um, solutions that are out there. And although um, the GDPR as it stands is about 75% people, processes, and procedures and documentation, there is a 25% component that is a pure technology that speaks to confidentiality, availability, and integrity of data systems. So it's something that I strongly suggest you look at, because the projections that we're seeing is that there will be about a $1.8 billion opportunity in GDPR related solutions in 2019. And that's pretty exciting. And look at the storage software will grow from a paltry 258 million in 2016 to 1.7 billion in 2019. So there's huge opportunities under the guise of GDPR, and so I would recommend that you educate yourself about what those requirements are, and certainly think about the services that you're providing in that context. We at SolarWinds MSP have identified some absolutely key takeaways from what we're calling the 7 common pitfalls, where we've identified opportunity for the MSPs in the space. So what we did here is we looked at 400 small, medium businesses and enterprises split equally across the US and UK. So the findings here are relevant in both markets, and this is an important takeaway, because when we looked and found, it seemed like organizations were very confident in their cybersecurity preparedness, 81%, okay? And 59% believe that they're less vulnerable than they were in 12 months previously. So very, very interesting statistic to come out of the cybersecurity. But at the same time, 71% of those survey respondents reported at least one breach in the past year. So highly confident, but breached anyways. And that, to me, is the big reveal. It really truly means that the businesses have maybe put a mistaken belief that their technology will save them, and that this cybersecurity issue is really about your anti-malware solution and best practices going on in your network. Clearly, though, that's not enough. We also figured out what the numbers say, and this is lining up against many of the other cost per record, data breach equations. We're finding that for small, medium businesses, 76,000 was the average cost of a data breach. Okay, so we're not talking about the organization's reputation. We're talking about the impact of that particular data breach. $76,000 bill. Now, to be honest, just depending on the size of that small medium business, 76,000 might be what you spend on boxes and stationery or shipping. Okay, but for many other businesses that are 10 or 15 people, 76,000 is a considerable amount of money. On the larger enterprise scale, where we see close to $1 million in losses, well, all of a sudden now we're talking about real money. And this means that for customers that are bulking at increasing, their spend on security services and security technology, this stat might be one that you could roll out, saying, we're not asking you to spend $76,000, but what we are doing is giving you the opportunity to not have to spend that money in the event of a data breach. So I think there's a great takeaway from here. So what was one of the first things that we found? Well, we found that 68% of businesses don't reliably apply or audit the security policies. This is really, really interesting to me because here's where, you might have a user awareness training one time that says, don't use unapproved USB devices on your computer. Okay, great. That's a typical one that you might find. Well, unless you can prevent that from happening, so lock that computer down in some particular way or fashion, or identify when an event like that has occurred, you might have a very difficult time in enforcing that kind of policy. So this is where, the inconsistency and the inability of the business to stop what's happening or even monitor what's happening really makes the actual security policies, irrelevant. So when we get to the second big takeaway, we're seeing that only 16% of businesses consider user security awareness training a priority. Now, this is very interesting to me because this is one of the big areas that could benefit from MSP involvement in MSPs providing end user security training. This is a requirement under GDPR and under many other regulatory compliances as well. Certainly in healthcare, there's a requirement for training on personally identifiable information, i.e. healthcare records, as well as PCI DSS has specific requirements for user security awareness training. This becomes important if the regulatory authorities ever knock on your door and say, do you have a security awareness training program? And if your answer is no, I'm sure that the glasses come halfway down the face and they stare at you and say nothing for quite a long time, and the entire thing descends into uncomfortable silence. The reality here is that this is a huge win for MSPs because they can provide it as a service, and if they are servicing that business, they now can actually reduce the percent chance that a security incident is going to occur. The other thing that they can do by providing user awareness training is possibly use it as a marketing platform for their own particular security services that they might offer. There's plenty of opportunity to do cybersecurity awareness training. You could use it as a free or cover your costs type of endeavor, but huge opportunity here to deal with the user security awareness training and lack thereof. Interesting that we also saw short-sightedness appear. So 6 out of 9 of the top security technologies are only deployed by a minority. This is interesting to me because when we looked at what I'm going to say what the most effective defenses are for a business, it is truly the layered security, which includes all of the things that you can do for free, like hardening your endpoints, removing Adobe Flash, controlling administrative access, etc., etc. So when you take those and you combine them with the technology stack, you actually end up with a particularly solid set of defenses. But if you're not implementing those layered security, and again, you should do it with a risk framework of some sort. Obviously, there are some businesses in your portfolio that are going to have higher risk than others, but the point here is that we can do more, and frequently we can do more for free to harden our customers against these kind of attacks. So when you think about technologies like SIEM and firewall rules and patch management, etc., we're seeing only about 33% are really practicing that, and those are the types of things that are relatively easy, if not free, to achieve. So a lot of that opportunity space is for MSPs as well. Complacency, yes. This is really interesting, and this is where that vulnerability management program and documentation of one, again, is a major requirement under GDPR and cybersecurity best practices. Vulnerability management, i.e. patch management, only about 30% are calling that reporting robust, which really means MSPs can come flying in there like superheroes with capes on, provide a documented vulnerability reporting process, and do patch management and retain the documentation for that. And that is a huge service. It's a huge win for cybersecurity. It's of course something that MSPs can monetize, but it's something that the business is going to badly need if ever there is an investigation into a data breach scenario. And also the effectiveness of vulnerability patching, patch management cannot be understated in terms of a cybersecurity technique. So lots more can be done on that front. So this is interesting to me in that we're seeing that post-breach, about half implement a new technology and about half change their processes. I find that number a little bit disconcerting because I would think, you would want to go, you'd want to change it. I mean, getting ransomware is painful. Getting data breach is probably worse for the business. I would have thought there would have been more change here. But I think one of the really interesting stats is 14%, it looks like, have just given up. They purposefully did nothing. That's unbelievable to me. And this shows me that maybe the technology departments of those particular businesses are completely overwhelmed, obsessed with projects that the business is trying to deliver, but not really comfortable in managing, responding to, or architecting a solution post data breach. So again, this is where MSPs can have a huge role to play as being, as being the fire department to come in and help a business that finds itself in a data breach scenario. Stagnation. I've talked a lot about this one in my public presentations around not only the key 9 prevention techniques, but looking at that layer and doing the new stuff to try and help a business. So as an example, when you think about the Windows operating system today, there's 2 key technologies in Windows for free that come right out of the box, and nobody's using them. Well, only maybe half are using them on disk encryption for the endpoints, but application whitelisting, about a third are using it. So it comes for free, folks, in the box in Microsoft. So I'm not sure if this one is just laziness, but when you think about it, if you're in a data breach scenario, very typical one, laptop gets left on a train, has patient records on it, has PII data on it, that's a reportable offense to the ICO. It's not reportable if the machine had full disk encryption running on it. And that is called BitLocker, and that comes for free in the Microsoft operating system past Windows Vista Pro, some versions of Windows 7, and finally in Windows 10 and Server 2008 by default. So the other thing, application whitelisting in the Microsoft world called App Locker. Again, maybe it was complex and difficult to use in about Server 2008, but now it's absolutely wizard driven. There's tons of great white papers on there. Again, about a third of people are using it. Not sure why, but really it could be a huge win right out of the gate. Lethargy. Well, this is where we're having real challenges, and I think businesses, especially IT departments that don't have a background in security, are really struggling. So what we've seen is it's becoming more difficult for businesses to identify that there's a breach that has happened, more difficult for the businesses to respond and recover. This is where I think MSPs can really show that that they can provide real value, especially if they have a technology stack that they can deploy that helps the business do all of these things faster. Even though we saw a bit of a rise from a 2016 report to where we are today, I think there's still opportunities for MSPs to bundle this as a service. So sort of that digital forensics incident response, but also monitoring of that infrastructure using different pieces of SaaS technology or subscription-based technology in a multi-tenant form, and do these things as a service. So this is something that I think is, again, an opportunity space. So what is my overall feeling? What am I coming away from this security survey with? I think there's a huge play for MSPs in security training for users. I also think that MSPs are really going to spend more time investigating and recovering from data breach than ever before. So they really should look at training and building their own capability, or partnering with someone that knows what they're doing in digital forensics and incident response. I also think that MSPs really need to start exploring their security product and services and techniques for hardening. So do some research. Don't build flat networks. Reduce and harden the exposure of your endpoints and control administrative privileges, and implement a vulnerability management program. Doing that will bring you immediate results and safeguard your customers, and having documentation that you're providing that really becomes part of GDPR as a service, GDPR compliance as a service. I really think there's great opportunity space there. The other thing to think about here is to upsell opportunities based on the risk. So understanding risk from the customer perspective. So losing your biggest customer is going to suck for your business, okay? And it's going to be bad for that particular customer. They might go somewhere else if their security fails, and especially if you have anything sort of to do with it. So I would suggest that if you want to safeguard your own MSP's income and prosperity, making the investment and helping your customers become more secure is really like investing in your own future. So the key here is that based on everything that we've got in terms of the number of companies being data breached, what those particular costs are, we can really go to the business and say, listen, it's going to cost you on average $76,000 if you get a ransomware update. I am looking for $7,000 to provide you with a 9-layered security solution so that you don't have to spend that 76 at a point in time, because it never happens when you want it to happen. It always happens when there might be additional stresses on that particular customer. So be proactive, get in front of the cybercrime train. And finally, I just want to point out this one stat that I came across just yesterday on where we were in terms of the growth for managed services, specifically in security, right? We saw in 2016 about a 17 billion. Look, by 2021, 34 billion. That's a huge increase, and that means people paying you to secure their environments. So I think that's great news for MSPs moving forward, and I think the survey has provided valuable guidance on what is going to happen now and in the future. Thank you for joining me, and please do download the survey from the link provided.